Welcome to fourth day of Web Services Programming Code Camp from JPassion.com. Today's topic, let's actually go over the topics we are going to cover today. So today we are going to mostly focus on REST. Okay, and if we have time, we might actually cover Web Services policy and web service addressing, but the focus of today's code camp is REST. So we're going to start with the REST overview, just talking about the concept of RESTful web services. And we'll learn a bit on JSON, the popular data format on the net, especially with the RESTful web services. And then we're going to learn JXRS 1 and 2. So this is the meat of today's code camp. So this JXRS provides Java APIs, mostly annotations, for deploying the RESTful web services. And the last topic we are going to cover on the REST is WADL. This is like a WSDL for SOAP-based web services, but this is for RESTful web services. Okay, so let's move on to REST overview. So here the goal is to learn the concept of RESTful web services. And so these are the set of topics we are going to cover in this presentation. So we are going to see and observe how we use the web today. In fact, RESTful web services is trying to actually mimic how we use the web today. Okay, and then we are going to learn what REST is. So HTTP methods and common patterns, and then let's talk about the why REST is actually getting popular as opposed to SOAP-based web services, and we're going to in fact compare REST versus SOAP. So how do we use web today? So the way that we are using web today is basically there are applications which contain some resources. Resources could be a file, it could be some business logic, whatever. They are deployed on web container. And the clients could be mobile devices or desktop browsers, and they access these services by sending HTTP request. So on the web, everything is accessible through the URLs, meaning every resource has an address. So as long as you have an address of a resource on the web, then you can access it. Pretty simple. So what is REST? So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It sounds a little bit too academic description. So it takes the RE and S and T. So that makes up the term REST. So we're going to actually learn what it means, what representational state transfer means, okay, in the rest of the presentation. This term was coined by Roy Fielding in his PhD thesis. And you can think of REST as architectural style of the web. Okay, so again, this might not actually ring a bell to you that much. Again, we're going to actually go over this concept in the rest of the presentation. So characteristics of REST. So RESTful services have uniform interface through well-known HTTP methods. So RESTful services are going to be accessed through these four HTTP methods: get, post, put, and delete. Okay? And RESTful based architectures are built from resources that are uniquely identified by URI. So as I said before, on the web, the way that you access a resource on the web is that the resource has an address, right? So that is exactly the same for RESTful based architecture. So every resource you are going to access should have an address in the form of URI. RESTful services are stateless, so each request from the client to server must contain all the information necessary to understand the request. So the server does not maintain any state on the client, so the client request should actually contain all the state as part of its data. Continuation of RESTful services characteristics. So in RESTful services systems, resources are manipulated through the exchange of representation of resources. So this is actually the representational state transfer, so the name comes from. So the way that client is going to communicate with the server is by sending some representation. Okay, so that representation is going to be either in the form of typically XML or JSON form. Okay, so for example, in a RESTful purchasing system, each purchase order is made through the combination of HTTP post method with XML documents. So HTTP post method will contain XML document like a purchase order request document, and that document will be representing a state. Okay, and so that's what the term representational state transfer means. Okay, which represent the order and send to the unique URI. Okay. So in REST system, communication occurs primarily through the transfer of representation of resources. Okay, so this is again where the name of REST comes from. Communication occurs between client and server through transfer of representation of resources. Okay, so this again representation of resources typically in the form of XML and JSON document. Okay, so state is maintained within a resource representation. So all the state should be inside of that representation, meaning XML or JSON file. Okay, that's where the name comes from, representational state transfer. So this actually picture shows what we just talked about in a more clear fashion. So client state 1 will send a request. So it will actually maybe send the HTTP post, HTTP get, okay, and then that the whatever data the client has is going to be sent to the server. Okay, so that is like a state transfer. Some data is actually the data is going to be transferred to the server, and server will do something about it, and then it will respond back with some other data that is again capture the state, and that is transferred to this client. Okay, so the easiest way to understand how the RESTful web services works is that some data in the form of XML or JSON maintain the state, and that document is being transferred between client and server to client, and that state is being transferred. Okay, all right, so that's pretty much what happens. Okay, so as I said before, in RESTful services system, every resource has an address, okay, meaning ID. So ID is in the form of URI. So these are examples of an address or an ID. Okay, so again, these are pretty familiar to most of us in terms of how we access the web. So RESTful services is basically mimic how we actually access the resources on the web. Okay, so example URI. So you can specify a URI like this. So this is the server, and then you're going to have the collection of servers. Under the servers, you have a type of the server and then particular ID. So basically, this URI is an example of identifying T6300, the server resource. Okay. All right, multiple representations. So when we say representation, you can think of them as formats. Okay, so the formats that are being supported in RESTful services includes XML and JSON, or it could be HTML or XHTML. And the format negotiation or content negotiation can be done in two different forms. So the client might actually specify the format it wants by setting the accept header in the request, HTTP request header. So this accept is the HTTP request header, and it will actually specify the format it wants to receive. Or you can specify, client typically will specify the format it wants by having an extension. So this is a lot more convenient for client instead of actually changing the HTTP accept header. So this is typically used for accessing, for asking for a particular format. Okay, so in this case, I want to get whatever resource of foo in the form of JSON. If you say .xml, then that means you want to get the resource in the form of XML. Okay. Okay, so what makes up a REST request? So when a REST request comes from the client, how does it work? Okay, first of all, the request has to be in the form of request should have URI of the resource it's trying to access, okay, or trying to communicate with. So this is an example. So basically, when you send this guy, I want to get all the parts, okay. And you also have to specify the verb, HTTP verb. So again, HTTP method or verb should be one of these four: get, post, put, and delete. So later on, you are going to see the combination of this URI and the method will actually dictate what you want to do. Okay, so basically, RESTful services are very good fit for performing CRUD-based operation: create, update, and delete. And the combination of your URI and the verb will actually say, I want to do creation, I want to do update, I want to actually delete, things like that. So we're going to talk about that in detail later on. Okay, so representation is how you view the state. So data and state transferred between client and server. Again, the format could be the XML, JSON, HTML, and things like that. So you're going to use this HTTP verb to exchange application state and representation. So you're actually, sending or sending some data using this URI and the combination, and using one of these verbs. Okay, so this is an example of RESTful request and response. So here what you said is that you are going to send the get HTTP, you're going to actually use HTTP get method, and this is the URI. Okay, and what it means is that I want to get all the recordings of Beatles. So in that case, the server, the RESTful service will send back all the recordings of Beatles in the form of XML. So this is a representation, and you can think of them as a state transfer from the server to the client. Okay, so this is a method, and this represent address of resource. Okay, so HTTP methods. So this picture, this slide is probably the most important slide. If you don't understand what I have talked about so far, don't worry about it. As long as you understand what I said on this particular slide, then you understand what RESTful Web Service is all about. Okay. So CRUD-based operations are performed through the HTTP method and URI. Okay, so the combination of HTTP method and the form of the URI. The form of the URI could be either collection URI, like songs, or entry URI, songs/3. Okay, meaning third songs and fourth songs and things like that. So there are two different forms in terms of URI form and the HTTP method. So combination of your HTTP method and URI form will dictate what CRUD operation you are going to perform. So for example, creating a brand new song, you are going to send post, and then you are going to send collection URI, meaning Beatles/songs. That means you're going to add a brand new song to the collection of songs of Beatles. Okay, and then of course the HTTP body should contain the contents of the new song you want to add. So that's for creating a brand new song, for example. The next one is read multiple, meaning you want to get the list of items. In that case, you are going to use get and collection URI. So in this case, basically Beatles/songs. That means you want to get all the songs of Beatles. Okay, so that is read multiple. If you want to read a single, then you are going to use get method, and then you are going to specify entry URI. So if you want to read a third song of Beatles, then it's going to be Beatles/songs/3. Okay, so that's entry URI. If you want to update a particular entry, then you are going to send put, and then you specify entry. Okay, so it's going to be again Beatles / songs and /3, and of course the contents of your HTTP should actually have the contents that will replace existing the entry content. Okay, so that is update. For delete, it's pretty simple. You are going to use a delete method, and then again you are going to specify entry URI. So in this case, again Beatles / songs and /3. Okay. Okay. All right. So let me actually move on. All right, so again, this is probably the most important slide I want you to remember. So basically, all the RESTful operations are based on this HTTP verb and URI. Okay. All right, so HTTP method get. Get is used to retrieve information. So get is used to retrieve the list of items or the trying to retrieve a single item. Okay, and depending on how you are going to specify your URI collection or your entry, you are going to read multiple or single. Okay. The idempotent and should not initiate the state changes. So idempotent means is that you can actually send the multiple. You can send the same request multiple times without making any changes on the server. Okay, because you are not actually changing, meaning you are not adding anything, you are not updating anything, you are not deleting anything. It shouldn't cause any state change. So you should be able to send get requests multiple times, and it's cacheable as well. Post is used to post to add the new information. So if you want to add a brand new entry to the Beatles, then you can say post music Beatles. Okay, maybe the better example is Beatles / songs or something like that. And again, the HTTP body should contain a new song. So this is the to update. So you say put and songs, and this is an ID. So I like to update this particular song with the contents that I have in my HTTP body. So this is a bit of repeat of what we already talked about. Delete is again, this is an ID. So I want to delete Hey Jude songs from the list of songs. Okay. Okay, moving forward. Let me see if there is any questions. So let me just pause. Common patterns. Typically these are the common patterns that you are going to see. Again, this is something that we already talked about. So when you say get and items, that means I want to get list of items. And when you say post items, and with item in request in the post data, meaning the inside of HTTP body, then you are adding a brand new item to the list of items. Okay. And the read item is get items and item ID, and update item is put items and item ID, and delete again is the items and item ID. So a good example of that is Atom Publishing Protocols. Atom Publishing Protocol is using this pattern. Okay, so again, these are typical patterns that we are going to use. Another pattern you can use is using map. Okay, so you can say get map is a key value pairs. This is actually getting a key value pairs, or putting a new value to a map. Then in that case, you put map and key, and read value of read values. So here get map, and you provide a key, and update a value, put map key, and delete map key. Okay, so this is another pattern, and Amazon S3 is actually using this pattern, but we are going to mostly focus on these patterns because these patterns are mostly used in real life, the RESTful web services. Okay, so why REST? So we just understand the concept of REST. So the reasons RESTful web services are becoming much more popular over SOAP-based web services, especially on the net, okay, is because RESTful-based web services are easy to work with. For example, clients do not need to use specialized APIs. You don't have to create stuff from WSDL. basically all you have to do is just sending HTTP request. So there is nothing to be required on the client. So in fact, you can use a browser as a client. Okay, so in fact, we're going to use a browser for experimentation and testing, talking to RESTful web services. So it's a lot simpler, at least from the client perspective. Of course, it's actually pretty straightforward on the server side as well. Okay, so client can just use a standard HTTP and URL. That's all client needs to do in order to access the RESTful web services. So many years ago, the internet services from Yahoo, Google, and Amazon, Flickr, these guys were actually exposing their services both in terms of SOAP and REST. And what they found was that most of the people are, using RESTful services because the main reason is because it's a lot easier for their clients to access their RESTful web services. If they need to actually access the SOAP-based version of their business logics, then the client has to download the WSDL document and they have to actually create a stub using a tool, and then they have to write the code to access those things, right? So it's a lot more work on the client side in order to access SOAP-based web services. RESTful-based web services, they can use browser even, to access their services. So that's the reason, at least for publicly available the services, REST is becoming much, much more popular. Okay. Okay, so it also provides uniformity. So URI is a uniform way of identifying resources. So again, as long as the client knows the URI, that's all the client has to know. As opposed in SOAP, basically you have to actually have a WSDL document, and every services have a different, let's say, operation name. So you have to actually use that particular operation name, right? But in the case of REST, you don't, basically all you have to know is just URI address. Okay, so URI is a uniform way to identify resources. And HTTP methods provide uniform interface to manipulate resources. So it's very, very simple. Because it's actually simple, it's a lot easier to build an application using a scripting language. Okay. All right, so let's compare REST versus SOAP. So I already compared these two a bit. So here, SOAP-based web services, the characteristics of SOAP-based web services, few URI, but many custom methods. Okay, because basically in SOAP-based web services, the business logics in the form of methods, are actually captured in the form of the custom methods. So if you are writing SOAP-based, if you're actually writing a client talking to SOAP, you have to actually use that particular custom method, right? Like this. In this case, HTTP is used only as a transport of SOAP messages. It doesn't do anything more than just being a transport, okay? However, RESTful-based web services, HTTP is the protocol, meaning you are going to use HTTP method, okay? Get, put, and delete, and put. And resources basically is in the form of URI. So in this case, you can think of RESTful-based web services, many resources in the form of URI, and then few fixed methods. The methods you have to deal with is just those 4 HTTP methods. Okay, so SOAP service versus RESTful resource. So SOAP-based web service is about services like basically performing some kind of method invocation, even though these are captured in the form of XML document. The REST is resource-oriented architecture. So resource is manipulated by exchanging representation. So representation could be XML or the JSON. For example, purchasing stock. So manipulate my portfolio resource. You can actually send a post request in a stock resource like this. So you can actually write pretty much all the applications in the form of RESTful-based web services. Okay. I mean, you have two choices. You can actually expose them in the form of SOAP-based web services or RESTful-based web services. And in general, you should be able to actually build your application in a form of RESTful-based web services. Okay, there is a very few cases that you can't, to build the RESTful-based web services. So Now, that doesn't mean that you should not use SOAP at all. Okay, so these are advantages of using SOAP over REST. SOAP provides transport independence. You can use SOAP over any kind of transport like HTTP, JMS, SMTP, while REST works only with HTTP. Okay, so if the transport independence is important, then you have to use SOAP. Okay, but in most cases, SOAP is being sent over HTTP. HTTP is the most primary transport that is being used in both. Okay. Well-defined standards. SOAP has well-defined standards in the area of security, transaction, reliability, while REST lacks the standards in these areas. Okay, so if you are, if you're concerned about this high-level functionality such as security, then you might actually go with SOAP. Okay. SOAP is better suited with a stateful operation. So REST is actually one of the characteristics of REST is stateless. Okay, so if you want to actually maintain some state, then SOAP might be a better choice. Well-defined service contract via WSDL. So REST didn't have WADL before. Okay, now it does. Okay, so this might not be a big deal anymore. Okay, but when REST was introduced in the beginning, it doesn't have WADL, and so the SOAP could have an advantage. The advantage of SOAP was actually it has a WSDL standard. Okay, so advantages of using SOAP, REST over SOAP is again simplicity. Okay, and REST works with several different representation, XML, JSON, HTML, and things like that, while SOAP works only with the XML. Okay, so that could be actually one issue that you have to think about. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. So let me just